What would you say to a man who gave 20 years of his life to serve his country, only to return home to face a courtroom? It's a question that stops the heart because it feels wrong, almost unthinkable. Yet one morning in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, that very scene unfolded. The man who stood there wasn't a stranger to discipline or sacrifice. He was a soldier, uniform neatly pressed, medals shining faintly under the courtroom lights. But behind the polished appearance, his eyes told a different story. They carried years of weight, nights without sleep, moments of loss, memories carved so deeply they lingered like shadows no one else could see. The room grew still when he stepped to the podium. This wasn't the face of a criminal or a careless citizen. This was the face of someone who had already given everything he had. And yet here he was waiting to be judged. Why was he here? What mistake had dragged him from the battlefield of service into the battlefield of the law? What happened in those long 20 years he was away? And perhaps the most burning question of all, what could Judge Caprio possibly say to a man who had already sacrificed so much? Every person in the courtroom leaned forward, curiosity and unease running through them. Even the prosecutor lowered his notes for a moment, recognizing that this wasn't just another case. Something about this soldier demanded silence, demanded attention. Judge Caprio's eyes softened as he looked at the man before him. For years, Caprio had earned a reputation for compassion, for seeing beyond the paperwork stacked in front of him. But on that day even he seemed taken aback. It wasn't often that someone like this, a man who had missed decades of birthdays, holidays and milestones in service of his country, stood before his bench. The soldier adjusted his stance, his hands trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it. And in that tremor lay a truth everyone could feel. There was more to this story than anyone could yet see. What followed next would stun the courtroom, move the audience to tears, and leave millions online replaying Caprio's words over and over. Because what the judge said that day wasn't just a verdict. It was something far greater, a message that would live on long after the gavel fell. Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom has always been different. It's not just a room where laws are enforced, it's a place where humanity meets justice. Over the years, people have come to recognize him not only for his sharp mind and fairness but for something far rarer. His ability to see the person behind the mistake. When others see a case number, he sees a story. When others read violations, he hears cries for help between the lines. That morning, the air inside his courtroom carried a kind of quiet that didn't come from fear, it came from respect. The audience sat in hushed anticipation, the soft shuffle of papers and faint ticking of the clock the only sounds breaking the stillness. Caprio's bench gleamed under the morning light streaming through the tall windows, casting soft shadows across the polished wood. Every day dozens stood before him, the worried, the guilty, the broken, the hopeful. But that morning felt different. Then the clerk called the next case and all eyes turned toward the door. A man stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, yet somehow weary in a way that went beyond exhaustion. His name was Michael. Mid-40s, hair neatly trimmed, posture still carrying the discipline of military life. He wore a simple jacket, the kind you'd expect from someone who doesn't care about appearances anymore. His gait was steady, but there was something heavy in the way he walked, as if each step carried 20 years of history. Judge Caprio greeted him with his usual warmth, but the moment their eyes met, something changed. It wasn't the kind of look a judge gives a defendant. It was the kind of look one human gives another when they sense unseen wounds. Michael had enlisted at just 18. While most of his friends were choosing colleges or careers, he had chosen a uniform. The world became his battlefield, deserts, forests, cities torn by conflict. He'd spent more birthdays abroad than at home, more nights under foreign skies than his own. He'd seen loyalty tested, fear confronted, and sacrifice demanded in ways no one could ever truly describe. For 2 decades, he had given his best years to something greater than himself. But when the final salute came and the uniform was folded away, what was left behind wasn't peace. It was a silence that followed him home, the kind of silence only veterans understand. The silence of being forgotten. Michael tried to rebuild, to fit into a world that had moved on without him. But every attempt felt like walking through fog. Friends he once knew were strangers now. The streets of his own hometown felt foreign. The structure and purpose that had defined his life were gone, replaced by confusion, loneliness, and financial struggle. He took small jobs, some days repairing fences, other days cleaning warehouses. He lived quietly, asking for little, surviving 1 week at a time. Yet, little by little, the small cracks in his life widened. A parking ticket here, a missed deadline there, the kind of things that seem minor to most people. But when you're trying to rebuild your life from nothing, every fine feels like another blow. And that's how he ended up here in front of Judge Caprio. Not as a criminal. Not as a rebel. But as a man who had spent half his life serving everyone else, and somehow lost himself along the way. Caprio looked at the papers in front of him, but even he knew they didn't tell the story. The fines listed were small, unpaid tickets, missed appearances, but the man standing before him was clearly burdened by something far heavier than money. For a brief moment the judge said nothing. He simply studied the man's face, the sharp jawline, the faint scars near his temple, the eyes that had seen both duty and loss. And in that silence the entire courtroom seemed to feel it too. This was not an ordinary case. Behind Michael, a few people in the audience whispered softly, sensing something deeper beneath the surface. Caprio leaned forward, his voice calm yet deliberate. "You've served your country," he said gently. "Now tell me, what brings you before this court today?" Michael hesitated. His lips parted, but the words wouldn't come out right away. You could see the war inside him, not the one fought with weapons but the one fought within the soul. What mistake could bring a soldier, a man who had already faced life and death, into a courtroom like this? That question hung in the air like smoke, drawing everyone closer, making them realize, this was not going to be about fines or penalties. It was about something much deeper, something that would soon change the entire room. Michael took a deep breath, his gaze fixed somewhere between the floor and the judge's eyes, as though he was looking at two worlds at once, the present moment and the ghosts of 20 years behind him. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but lined with exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from a lack of sleep, but from living too long in survival mode. "Your Honor," he began softly, "I don't even know where to start." The room was silent, every ear straining to catch his words. "I joined the military when I was 18. Back then I didn't have much. No real plan, no money, not even a clear sense of who I was. The army gave me structure. It gave me purpose. I thought I'd serve for a few years and then come back home, maybe start a family, maybe build something for myself." He paused, the corner of his lip tightening as if holding back something unspoken. But life, it had other plans. He told them about the years that followed, deployments that stretched from months into years, the way time blurred in the deserts and jungles where every sunrise looked the same, and every sunset carried the fear of not making it to the next one. He spoke of comrades who became brothers and brothers who never made it home. There were birthdays I missed. My mother's funeral. I couldn't even get leave for that. His voice faltered for the first time and a tremor ran through it. When I finally came home for good, the house I grew up in wasn't even there anymore. It had been sold. Everything I left behind was gone. He swallowed hard. "There's a kind of silence that follows you after war," he said slowly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "It's not just quiet, it's empty. You come back and everyone moves on but you're still stuck somewhere else. You try to sleep but you keep waking up to sounds that aren't there. You try to talk but nobody really understands what you're saying." Caprio listened intently, his expression softening with every word. Even the prosecutor lowered his pen, realizing this wasn't a defense, it was a confession of a different kind. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he continued. "I tried to find work. Did a bit of everything, construction, deliveries, even security. But when you're gone that long, the world changes faster than you do. People don't want to hire a 40-year-old vet with gaps in his resume and shadows in his eyes." A faint, bitter smile crossed his face, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Some months I made it. Other months, I didn't. I lived out of my car for a while. Sometimes I'd just drive at night because it was easier than trying to sleep. I didn't want people to see me like that. The guy who once wore the uniform now hiding in parking lots." He looked up for the first time and though his eyes glistened, his tone stayed calm. "That's how I ended up with those tickets, Your Honor. Parking fines, expired registration, missing court dates I didn't even know about. I wasn't ignoring the law, I was just trying to make it through each day. And somehow, one thing turned into another until I got this letter saying I had to appear here." The words hung heavy in the air. Caprio nodded slowly, glancing down at the papers before him, but the pages looked meaningless compared to the man standing there. Michael exhaled, the sound fragile. "I know it sounds small. Fines. Tickets. Deadlines. But after 20 years of serving and coming back to nothing, every little thing feels like another battle. It's like life keeps testing how much more I can take." His voice deepened, carrying a raw honesty that silenced even the courtroom whisperers. "I've buried friends. I've seen men fall in front of me. I've seen what real loss looks like. But somehow, what scares me the most is losing myself completely because I can't find my place anymore. I'm not asking for pity, Your Honor. I don't want to be treated like I don't care. I do care. I just don't always know how to keep up anymore." For a moment, Judge Caprio didn't speak. Neither did anyone else. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling vent and the echo of those words that seemed to linger in every corner of the room. A veteran who had survived war, now fighting to survive peace. How much can one man give before life demands even more from him? That question pulsed through the courtroom, through the eyes of everyone watching, and through the quiet ache sitting between the man at the bench and the man standing before him. And though no one could answer it yet, everyone sensed that what was about to come next would change everything. The prosecutor cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the stillness of the courtroom. For a moment, everyone seemed to remember where they were, back to the cold structure of law, the rhythm of justice that didn't pause for pain. "Your Honor," he began, flipping open a folder, "the defendant, Mr. Michael Thompson, has accumulated multiple violations over the past 2 years. Primarily parking infractions and late fees. The total amount currently stands at just over $3,000. His tone was firm, professional, but even he seemed to hesitate before continuing. "There have also been missed deadlines and at least 2 summonses that went unanswered. Normally, this kind of pattern would indicate negligence or disregard for the law." The words negligence and disregard hung heavy in the air, sharp, unforgiving terms that didn't seem to belong to the man standing at the podium. Michael didn't flinch, but his shoulders stiffened slightly, like a soldier bracing for another impact. The prosecutor's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "However," he said, glancing briefly toward Michael, "given the defendant's background, I understand there may be extenuating circumstances. Still, the court must address these matters under the law." Judge Caprio nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the bench. "Mr. Thompson," he said gently, "you've heard the summary. These fines didn't appear overnight. Why did you let it get this far?" Michael exhaled, his jaw tightening. "Because, Your Honor," he said, voice steady but low, "I didn't know how to come back to normal life. After 20 years of service, I thought I'd learned how to fight every kind of battle, but I wasn't prepared for this one." He paused, eyes fixed on the grain of the wood before him as if searching for the right words. "In the Army, every day had a mission. Every action had a purpose. But when I came home, there was no mission anymore. Just bills. Noise. Empty rooms." Caprio's gaze softened. "Go on," he said quietly. "I tried to find structure," Michael continued. "At first I helped out at the VA center. Met other vets who were trying to get back on their feet. I guess I started putting their needs ahead of mine, helping them with housing applications, job forms, even just listening when they needed to talk. It gave me a reason to get up in the morning." He gave a small, almost self-conscious shrug. "But while I was busy helping everyone else, my own life was falling apart. I couldn't keep up with payments. My car became my home. I'd park it near the pier some nights because it felt quiet, safe." He hesitated before adding, "That's when the ticket started. One here, another there. I told myself I'd fix it later, but later kept moving further away." The prosecutor, now silent, looked down at his notes. The audience behind Michael shifted, their faces reflecting a mix of disbelief and compassion. This wasn't defiance, it was exhaustion. Judge Caprio's eyes lingered on the man before him, reading the layers of struggle between every word. "So you're telling me," he said softly, "that the same man who spent 20 years serving others, first his country then his fellow veterans, now stands here because he forgot to serve himself?" Michael nodded slowly. "I guess that's one way to put it, Your Honor." The judge leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "And in all that time," he asked, "you never asked for help?" Michael's lips tightened. "No, sir. I didn't think I deserved it. A lot of guys came home in worse shape than me. Some didn't come home at all. I figured I could handle my problems on my own." A heavy silence followed. The law said one thing, fines, deadlines, enforcement. But everything about this man contradicted the cold print of the statutes. From the corner of the room, a woman sniffled quietly. Someone else shifted, eyes glistening. The weight of Michael's story pressed against the air, making even the clock's ticking feel intrusive. Caprio finally broke the silence. "Mr. Thompson," he said, voice calm but firm, "the law doesn't ignore the past, but it also can't erase it. You've carried your duty far longer than most men ever could. But here's the truth, duty doesn't stop when the war ends. Sometimes the hardest fight is the one that happens after." Michael nodded, his throat tight. The judge's words weren't a verdict, but they struck deeper than any sentence could. The tension filled every inch of the courtroom. On one side the law stood in black and white, cold, absolute. On the other, a man whose life had been nothing but gray, sacrifice, struggle, survival. And now, everyone watching wondered the same thing. Would Judge Caprio see the soldier or the stack of violations? Would this be another case closed, or a story redeemed? No one knew yet, but one thing was certain. The answer would reveal far more about justice than any rulebook ever could. For a moment, the air in the courtroom felt thick, the kind of silence that builds before a storm. Judge Caprio's question still lingered in the air. Why didn't you ask for help? Michael stood still, the weight of his own restraint pressing down on him. His lips trembled, and for the first time since he stepped into that courtroom, his composure cracked. Because, he began, voice barely above a whisper, I never really came home. Caprio's brows furrowed gently. What do you mean? Michael looked up, eyes glassy but determined, as if he'd decided he couldn't hide behind silence any longer. I mean that when I got back. I was here but I wasn't really here. I've got PTSD, Your Honor. Some days I wake up and I don't even know what day it is. Other days I can't bring myself to walk outside. It's like I'm trapped in two worlds, one that ended 20 years ago and one that won't stop moving without me. A hush fell over the room. Every sound, every breath, every creak of a chair, disappeared. Michael swallowed hard, his voice trembling now. The fines piled up because there were nights I couldn't do it. I'd see the letters come in the mail and just stare at them. Sometimes I'd put them away and tell myself I'd handle it tomorrow, but tomorrow always felt too heavy. I didn't want people to see me like this. I didn't want them to think I was broken. He took a deep breath, his eyes unfocused, drifting somewhere between the courtroom and the memories that haunted him. When I came back I thought I'd left the war behind. But it followed me home. Every sound, a door slam, a car backfiring, felt like something I'd already lived through. I started avoiding people, even my neighbors. I didn't want to explain why I'd jump at loud noises, or why I couldn't sleep. The tremor in his hands became visible. So I stayed inside. And when you stay inside long enough, the world forgets you. Bills come. Deadlines pass. The world keeps moving and you're just stuck in yesterday. No one moved. Not even the court clerk. Michael looked toward Judge Caprio, his voice barely holding together. Your Honor, I'm not making excuses. I just wanted to explain why I failed to show up, why I didn't pay. It wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I didn't know how to live again. The words fell like stones into water. Slow, heavy, irreversible. Even the prosecutor, who moments ago had been all logic and procedure, lowered his gaze. His pen lay untouched on the table. For the first time, the file in front of him, the list of unpaid fines, the sterile printout of violations, looked almost absurd against the raw truth echoing through the room. Judge Caprio sat motionless for several seconds. His usually firm eyes glistened as he leaned forward slightly, his tone softening with genuine emotion. Mr. Thompson, he said gently, you've carried more than anyone should ever have to carry. You've been fighting a battle no one could see. Michael blinked rapidly, his breathing uneven. Caprio's voice broke the silence again, this time quieter, slower. We often think that when soldiers return home, the war ends. But sometimes the hardest war begins right here, inside. In that instant, something unspoken passed through the room. Empathy, sorrow, respect, all colliding in a shared realization. This wasn't about tickets anymore. This wasn't about money, deadlines, or civic violations. This was about a man still paying a price for serving others. A man the system had overlooked, the world had forgotten, and whose quiet suffering was finally being heard. The courtroom stayed silent, everyone aware that they were witnessing something rare, not just a confession but the truth of a life lived in shadows. And as Michael stood there, trembling yet lighter than before, it became clear to everyone, especially Judge Caprio, that the man before them wasn't just seeking forgiveness. He was seeking peace. Michael's hands began to shake and for the first time, his voice cracked under the weight of everything he'd held inside. Your Honor, he whispered, I've lost people. Good people. Men I laughed with one day and buried the next. He stopped, swallowing hard. The courtroom blurred in his eyes. I still see their faces every night. I see the convoy lights, the smoke, the noise, and then the silence that comes after. You don't forget silence like that. He drew a shaky breath, trying to steady himself, but the words wouldn't come easily. I tell myself I should have done more. That maybe if I'd stayed one more day or moved 2 steps faster, they'd still be here. His jaw clenched, his shoulders trembling. That's the part that doesn't go away, the guilt. You live. They don't. And somehow you're supposed to come home and just move on. Several people in the audience wiped their eyes. One older man, himself a veteran, lowered his head, unable to look up. Even the court clerk paused, her pen hovering above the paper, forgotten. Michael looked toward Judge Caprio, and for the first time, tears slipped down his cheeks. "I carry them with me, Your Honor. Every single one of them. Every day. Every night. Their names, their faces. I can't forget. And it's heavy. Heavier than anything I've ever lifted in uniform." He pressed his palm against his chest, his voice trembling. "So when I see those letters about tickets or fines, it's not that I don't care. It's just that I can't always find the strength to care about the world out here, when I'm still trying to survive the world in here." He tapped his chest twice, a soft hollow sound that seemed to echo through the entire courtroom. A deep, aching silence followed. Judge Caprio's expression was unreadable. His hand rested lightly on the bench, his eyes locked on Michael, not as a judge watching a defendant, but as a man listening to another man's pain. The tension in the room thickened. No one spoke, no one moved. The prosecutor stared at the floor, his usual composure gone. Michael's voice came again, quieter now, almost childlike. "Sometimes I think maybe I didn't really come back for a reason. Maybe part of me stayed with them. Maybe that's where I belong." Gasps rippled through the room. A woman in the back began to sob quietly. Someone reached out to comfort her, but even that small sound felt too loud for the moment. The weight of Michael's confession seemed to pull the entire room into its orbit. Every breath, every heartbeat synchronized with his pain. And then, suddenly, Michael went silent. His hands gripped the podium, knuckles white as if holding himself up by sheer will. For a few seconds it felt like time stopped. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, the light catching his glasses, his expression both pained and reflective. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He closed it again, pressing his lips together as he fought his own emotions. The audience held its collective breath. Everyone was thinking the same thing. What could he possibly say to a man who had already given everything? What words could ever measure up to that kind of sacrifice, that kind of suffering? And in that silence, the answer wasn't just about the law. It was about humanity. Judge Caprio's eyes softened as he drew in a slow, steady breath. He knew the next words he spoke would matter more than any verdict he'd ever delivered. Judge Caprio sat back for a long moment, the silence of the room almost sacred. His eyes glistened, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried both authority and warmth, the kind of tone that makes every word sink deep into the heart. "Mr. Thompson," he began softly, "there are moments in this courtroom when the law and humanity meet at a crossroads. And today, this is one of those moments." Michael stood motionless, his hands still gripping the podium, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Caprio continued, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "You've given this country 20 years of your life. 20 years of service, of sacrifice, of carrying the weight most people could never imagine. You've missed birthdays, family, peace, and perhaps even pieces of yourself, all in the name of something greater." The judge glanced down at the file before him. The pages now seemed insignificant, almost shameful in their simplicity. "And now," he said looking back up, "you stand here because of a few unpaid fines. Let me be clear, this court cannot measure the cost of your sacrifices in dollars. It never could." He paused, letting the words breathe. "Justice, Mr. Thompson, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about understanding. It's about knowing when a man has already paid more than enough." Michael blinked rapidly, his eyes shining with disbelief. "So," Caprio said, his tone firm but kind, "I'm not going to add to your burden today. The fines are dismissed. Completely." A soft gasp ran through the courtroom. Someone clapped their hands together instinctively, then stopped, realizing that applause felt too small for the gravity of the moment. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his expression both compassionate and resolute. "Your service to this country is a debt we can never repay. But today in this courtroom you owe nothing. What you've given is already more than enough." Michael's lips trembled. He lowered his head, covering his face with one hand, the relief flooding through him in quiet sobs. Behind him, tears filled the eyes of strangers, veterans, parents, ordinary citizens, all united in a single truth, that mercy, when given rightly, is its own form of justice. And in that small Rhode Island courtroom, the law didn't just serve the people, it honored one. There are moments that remind us justice isn't always about laws, rules, or fines. Sometimes the greatest form of justice is gratitude. Gratitude for those who gave quietly, who served without expectation, who came home carrying the weight of battles most of us will never see. That day in Judge Caprio's courtroom wasn't just another hearing. It was a reminder that behind every uniform, there's a human being. Someone who has seen things they'll never talk about, felt losses that words can't heal, and fought wars that don't end when the guns fall silent. Michael didn't come to court looking for pity. He came looking for a way forward. And in return he found what every wounded heart hopes to find: understanding. The kind of understanding that doesn't erase pain but helps it feel a little lighter. Friends, imagine for a moment that you were in Judge Caprio's chair. A man who gave 2 decades of his life to protect others now stands before you, broken, exhausted but still standing. What would you have said to him? Would you have followed the letter of the law, or listened to the quiet truth behind his trembling words? Because sometimes true justice isn't found in punishment, it's found in compassion. It's found in seeing the person, not just the mistake. And maybe that's why millions of people across the world watched this moment and cried. Not because of the verdict itself, but because it reminded them of something deeply human, that kindness still exists, even where we least expect it. So if this story moved you, share it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what mercy means to you, and how you think we can honor those who serve long after they've left the battlefield. Because in that courtroom, Judge Caprio didn't just deliver a decision. He gave back a piece of dignity to a man who had given everything. And though the gavel fell, the echo of his words still lingers, a promise that compassion will always have a place in justice. But in the next case, Judge Caprio faced a decision even more heartbreaking, one that tested not only his compassion, but the very limits of justice itself.